Today we're going to be talking about what makes a good synthetic brush. When you think about the word synthetic, what does it really mean? It's a chemical compound to make something that mimics something that's the real thing. So what makes a good synthetic brush is a brush that will do just that, will be as close to the real thing as possible. Now, synthetic brushes have got a bad rap over the years because they are just not across the board in the highest quality. There are higher end ones that have kind of come up over time, but now things have changed. The science behind how they're being made has changed, and they are an incredibly useful tool if you use the right one. And I highly recommend giving them a try if you haven't already. What we're going to look at today are two separate types of synthetics, because synthetic, as I said, is not just like you think about those cheap white nylon hairs that go in a water brush or something. We're looking at the higher end, something that's actually going to really try to replicate what the real natural hair would do. So we have something that is we have our high-end Kolinky Synthetic Brush here. This is our Rhapsody brush. Next to that we have our Mimik Kolinky brush. And then if you watched our What Makes a Good Bristle Brush video, this is the same brush we discussed in that. This is the Imperial Bristle Brush, natural bristle hair. And this is our Berlin synthetic. So what we're going to do is first talk about the watercolor brush. So let me put these to the side. Now, when it comes to synthetic brushes, one of the major changes that have been made in the higher end synthetic lines is the hairs themselves. A lot of times a lower quality synthetic brush has a very uniform hair diameter. In fact, it's probably exactly the same across the board. But that's not the way hair really works. Hairs come in different diameters and widths. And the reason this is important is because those different diameters and widths help capture and hold paint, which is something that a natural brush is known to do better, and that's part of the reason why. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certain things that a synthetic brush can't exactly mimic from the real deal, such as a natural hair has pores to it, and so it can be more absorbent. But on the other hand, since it's a synthetic brush, there are certain things it can do better than the real deal, such as hold a sharper point for longer. So there's a bit of a give and take, but I guess let's just take a look and see how they work. So as I said, we have our natural Kolinky hair here. Comes to a nice sharp point. You can see there's a good belly on it for holding water. And what we're going to test is just how these two compare. This is our Mimik Kolinky in terms of putting lines down and just using a cold press watercolor paper here. So let me just go into some water. And now, when you're using a brush, we're looking at the line retention, we're looking at the spring of the bristles. So really nice. Let's put more pressure down, less pressure, really nice and sharp. Okay, this is what I would expect from a high-end Kolinky Synthetic Brush. Look at that, you can get a very razor sharp point. And as I said, it will hold a lot of water. And that's not to say that this brush won't hold water. It's just part of that natural hair. It is naturally absorbent. So let's see how our synthetic does. Now, I also want you to keep in mind when you're looking at the performance of a synthetic brush versus a natural brush, if you feel that the synthetic brush could work for you, but you're just used to using natural hair brushes, I would invite you to look at the price difference between the two, see which is more cost effective, and if it is of interest to you, to give them a shot. I personally like the synthetic brushes, that's just my preference. They're cruelty-free, and they're generally less expensive than the real hair brushes out there. So this is our Mimik Kolinky. Put some pressure down, nice spring to it. Let's see if we can get some nice fine lines. Now, another thing that has kind of plagued synthetic brushes in the past is that they weren't known to be as resilient as natural hair. And what I mean by that is, with continued use in scrubbing, they would lose their point or start to fray. Again, with the science that's going into how these brushes are made, the Mimik Kolinky and the Berlin brushes are both made by a master brush maker in Germany. The science behind them makes them a lot more resilient than what you might expect or have used in the past. So that's another very important thing to keep in mind. Now, before we switch over to the bristle, I want to just kind of address synthetics versus natural hair in terms of when it comes to a good synthetic brush, what should your brush not do, okay? So in a good bristle brush video, we're talking about the imperial brushes, right? Okay, so this is one that hasn't been used before. I believe there's still some starch in it, okay? Starch is something that they use to protect it in shipping, give it a little bit of stiffness. So a lot of times, you want to break that starch up and put it in some water. Now, I said in our What Makes a Good Bristle Brush video that the hairs should not come out after the first cleaning, okay? So what I mean by that is before you ever paint with a bristle brush, you're going to want to soak it in water. And because of the process of how they're made and the fact that it is natural hair, I don't even know, this is a high-end brush. You might find, and I even doubt that if I can find one, you'll see it, a few loose hairs, which is fine. As long as after you've cleaned them out, and I didn't, this is a really nice brush, there are none, but again, as I say in the bristle brush video, that doesn't matter even if a few bristles came out. It has nothing to do with that first cleaning, it's the continued use, the bristles continue to come out. Now, I want you to understand that I'm coming up here and I'm comparing not a cheaper synthetic brush to what I consider a good synthetic brush. I'm comparing the real deal to these good synthetic brushes. I'm not interested in showing you guys, well, look, this is not good and this is good. I'm actually trying to show you just how much performance you can expect from these newer, higher-end, better designed synthetic brushes. So we have our imperial bristle here, and as I said, sometimes with new bristle brushes, some loose hairs will come out. We didn't get any with this one, but it really doesn't matter. Once you give it that initial cleaning, what the test is continued use. Do you get those loose hairs in your painting? Same thing with Kolinky hair. A few loose hairs might come out in the start, but if it continues to come out, that's a sign of not a quality bristle brush. But with synthetics, you should not have any loose hairs at all, ever. I suppose it is possible that you might get maybe one or something because there are just minor things that happen in production. But outside of just the bare minimum, these basically stay in place. They are glued together. These are extremely well-made brushes. The crimp's very tight. These are things that we've discussed in other videos. Now, in the bristle brush video, I was comparing the bristle brush to a lower-end bristle brush. But you can see here, these higher-end brushes, the crimps are both very tight. The filaments are both, very thick. We've got a lot of hair, to power through paint. And the handles are both, lacquered and have a good weight and balance to them. So those are all things that go into it. But let's play around with these bristle brushes and see how they compare side by side. So now we're going to compare our imperial bristle to the Berlin. Now, with the sable brush and synthetic sable brush, I talked about kind of the gives and takes, how it was going to have a few advantages when it came to retention and resiliency, but it's still a little bit difficult for a synthetic brush to hold quite as much water. Now, when you're using bristle brushes, you're generally not using watercolor. That doesn't mean you can't, but generally you're not. These are used to power through thick paints. So we're going to be testing how well these both power through paints. We're looking at brush stroke retention. Sometimes people want that brushed look to their art, and also the flexibility of smoothing them out if need be. Now, with that being said, I will say that there is one kind of caveat, sort of like in the watercolor brushes. When it comes to natural hair bristle brushes, these work great powering through anything, oil, acrylic, what have you. The synthetic bristle brushes, however, work, in my opinion, very well with oils, but they are super, super powerful with acrylics. They are almost designed to be used for acrylic paints. Acrylic paint, acrylic brush, I mean, that's what this is. It's an acrylic, hair, more or less. They will hold up using oils, and they'll do a great job. But I think that if you're an acrylic painter and you've been using natural bristle hair, you might be pretty surprised with just how quality the synthetic bristle brushes can be for your acrylic painting. So let's play with some paint and take a look. All right, so we're going to start with our natural hair bristle brush. And going back to what makes a good bristle brush, some of those same things you're going to keep in mind. And we'll add a link at the end of the video and in the description below to that video in case you haven't seen it, what makes a good bristle brush. We're going to be looking at how well the brushes stay together when you pull them across a canvas, okay? You don't want them flailing out. You want them almost kind of like to curve in, to tuck in. And we also want to look at that spring. We talked about the spring and how we want the spring to be further up than closer to the ferrule to avoid paint getting into the ferrule. So we're going to be looking at those two things side by side. And for that reason, I'm going to be doing strokes. I'm going to be pulling them down this way so that we can take a look at that easily with our dynamic camera. All right, so let's just go into some paint. Okay, we've got a nice thick glob of paint on the end of this brush, okay? So let's just put it down on the canvas. Let's just see how it performs. Let me actually kind of hold this more like a long handle brush. You notice how the bend is happening closer towards the end of the bristles rather than closer to the ferrule. That's super important because as paint builds up, not even builds up, as just the littlest amount of paint gets into the ferrules, it can completely destroy a brush easily if it's not cleaned out properly. Notice how these lines are tight. They're holding together. The brush strokes, the brush hairs are curving in. These are the things we're looking for. So with that being said, let's compare that to the Berlin synthetic version of the bristle brush. You can also notice there are some brush strokes in this, right? That's part of that bristle brush look. There are softer hairs out there you can use. There's sable hair for oils and acrylics you can use. Again, with acrylic paints, I really, really, truly want to encourage you to use acrylic brushes. They clean easier, and they are designed to be used with acrylic paints. That's not to say, again, that you cannot use bristle brushes for them. However, I do want to point out something very important. Whatever you decide to use your brush for, stick with that medium. If this is something that you've decided, well, I want to use synthetic hair and I'm an oil painter, I'm going to use this for oil, maybe I'll dabble in acrylic, I really don't recommend it. Whatever brush you use, whether it's synthetic, natural, stick with the medium and don't switch between those two, especially something that is solvent-based versus water-soluble. That can lead to a lot of complications in your paint, your brush performance. You might think you have it all cleaned out of solvent, and next thing you know, you go into your acrylic and it's all streaky because you didn't get the solvent out. I really recommend having a set of brushes for each medium, whatever suits your needs. So we'll go into that blue again. Okay, again, we've got a nice thick blob of paint there. All right. Holding together nicely. Even better in my opinion. This is where these synthetic brushes really shine. They are engineered to taper in properly, where They are designed to do that with natural bristle hair, and as you just saw, they can do that. But these are scientifically designed to do it, which is even more accuracy, which I like. And then one thing that I failed to test, which we can test right now, is also how it kind of can do the impasto look, because again, we're trying to power through these acrylics here. Before we do that, let me also just say that you can see that the bend in these is again closer to the hair than the ferrule. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so now let's go into a thicker application of paint and just see if we can build some peaks up with both of these brushes. All right, so let's just kind of try to do a thick application of paint. We're gonna go into this red here. All right, and what we're gonna just do is see if we can get some really thick paint techniques. Now, we're not testing the paint. This is just, this is a high-end acrylic paint. This is the Charvin extra fine acrylic paint. This is not an impasto paint. It is a medium to heavier body paint. It's not, over the top designed to be, building huge structures. It's just, I would say this is on par with just about any brand in terms of their medium body. But the quality is great. What we're looking at is what the brush can do, and you can see it just, the natural hair just powers through it, and it can allow you to create peaks and build this kind of texture, okay? So now let's see if we can replicate these kind of peaks with the synthetic brush. So now we have our Berlin brush, and we're going to go into that same red, okay? And let's just see if we can get some peaks. I don't want to say that this is doing a better job, because some of it, I'm not using the exact same amount of paint. It's what I like to refer to as artist science standards. It's how you would play with paint at home. But you can definitely see that this can easily accomplish, and I actually think better in some cases here, the point and peak and line retention. They really power through those paints really nicely. As with all synthetic brushes, they are cruelty-free, which is always a plus. They are sustainable. The Berlin has also a sustainable wood handle, which is a nice addition as well. And I would like to just kind of show these two again side by side here. These are professional quality brushes. And I think that that is a big that's a big term to throw around. I don't believe brushes that have been made since the turn of the century, and I say that, I mean into the 21st century, very few have been what I would consider a professional quality synthetic brush. You usually don't see that. There are some outliers, don't get me wrong, but these are without a doubt pro. These are high-end. This is a quality synthetic brush. What makes a good synthetic brush? This is not just golden Taclon or regular white nylon. These are brushes that have been engineered specifically to do what a synthetic, in any sense of the definition, is meant to do. Mimic the real thing using something that is non-organic. So that is really the message here. So we're using, again, Mimik Kolinky and Berlin. And I hope this is helpful for you. Is there anything else that you would like to see us do up here? What makes a good fill in the blank? I have a few more planned, but I always like your feedback and to hear what you guys would like to see. If this was helpful to you, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell to be notified when we post new videos. And yeah, I think that this is a really good thing, because when it comes to synthetic brushes, for an artist that's been painting for a while, they might have, I don't want to say have had a negative connotation, but there was something that was not professional about them. And I think that that's not the case any longer. There are professional quality synthetic brushes for both watercolor, acrylic, oil, that really do a great job at mimicking the real thing. And where they lack in certain areas, versus the natural, I think they exceed them in others. So where, you know, a synthetic, again, just to reiterate, where a synthetic Kolinky will not necessarily hold as much water as a natural Kolinky brush, they will have sharper points, and I find that they will last longer in terms of keeping those points over time, because they have been engineered to do so. So again, hope this was helpful for you, and we will see you in our next What Makes a Good, well, it's up to you.